The golden afternoon sun filtered through the tropical canopy of Phuket, Thailand, casting dappled shadows across the manicured pathways of Tiger Kingdom. For tourists from around the world, this wildlife attraction represented the ultimate photo opportunity, a chance to get impossibly close to one of nature's most magnificent apex predators. The facility promised safe encounters with tigers in controlled environments, where visitors could walk alongside these massive cats and capture the kind of images that would make their social media followers gasp with envy. But on this particular day, the carefully maintained illusion of safety would be shattered in seconds, revealing the deadly truth that no amount of human control could ever truly tame the primal instincts of a creature that had evolved to kill. The Indian tourist who entered Tiger Kingdom that afternoon was like thousands of others who visited the facility each year, excited, confident, and completely unprepared for what was about to unfold. He had traveled thousands of miles to experience something that would have been unthinkable just generations ago. Walking side by side with a tiger, touching its fur and capturing selfies that would document his courage for posterity. The tiger he was paired with appeared docile, almost sleepy in the tropical heat. Weighing several hundred pounds and measuring nearly 10 feet from nose to tail, the massive predator moved with the fluid grace that had made its species the apex hunter of Asian jungles for millions of years. To the tourists' eyes, the animal looked like an oversized house cat, beautiful, powerful, but seemingly harmless under the watchful supervision of the facility's trainers. This perception would prove to be fatally flawed. The trainer handed the tourist a chain leash attached to the tiger's collar, a prop designed to give visitors the illusion that they were in control of the massive predator. The tourist gripped the chain confidently, posing for photos as he walked alongside the tiger through the enclosure. Everything seemed perfect, the ultimate adventure photo opportunity unfolding exactly as advertised. But tigers are not domestic animals that have been bred for thousands of years to accept human dominance. They are apex predators whose every instinct has been honed by evolution to respond to perceived threats with explosive violence. The seemingly docile behavior that tourists interpreted as friendliness was actually the result of careful conditioning, drug sedation, or simple predator patience, all of which could evaporate in an instant when the wrong trigger was activated. The tourist, emboldened by the tiger's apparent calm, decided to attempt the ultimate selfie. He knelt down to the tiger's level, bringing himself face to face with a predator whose ancestors had ruled the jungles of Asia for millions of years. In that moment, he violated every rule of predator-prey dynamics that had kept humans alive since the dawn of our species. The change in the tiger's demeanor was instantaneous and terrifying. What happened next was captured on video that would soon go viral across social media platforms worldwide, becoming a stark reminder of what occurs when human arrogance collides with apex predator instincts. The footage showed the tourist kneeling beside the massive cat, his hand extended toward the tiger's sensitive belly area as he attempted to position himself for the perfect selfie. The tiger's response was swift and devastating. In a blur of orange and black stripes, the massive predator lunged at the tourist with the lightning speed that had made its species the most feared hunter in Asian forests. The man's screams pierced the tropical air as nearly 400 pounds of muscle, bone, and razor-sharp claws crashed into him with the force of a freight train. The tiger's massive paws, each equipped with retractable claws that could slice through flesh like knives, raked across the tourist's body as the predator's jaws sought his throat with the precision of a creature that had been designed by evolution to kill efficiently. The man's attempts to defend himself were pathetic against a predator that could kill a water buffalo with a single bite to the neck. Chaos erupted throughout the enclosure as other tourists screamed and fled, their vacation adventure transformed into a nightmare of blood and violence. The facility's trainers rushed toward the attack, armed with sticks and shouted commands that seemed inadequate against the primal fury that had been unleashed. The lead trainer struck the tiger repeatedly with a control stick, shouting commands in Thai as he desperately tried to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond human management. But the tiger was no longer the docile photo prop that tourists had been posing with moments before. It was an apex predator operating according to millions of years of evolutionary programming. The attack continued for what felt like an eternity, but lasted only seconds. The tiger's massive jaws clamped down on the tourist's arm, while its hind claws raked across his torso, tearing through clothing and flesh with horrifying efficiency. The man's screams mixed with the tiger's growls to create a soundtrack of terror that would haunt everyone who witnessed the encounter. Only the trainer's desperate intervention prevented the attack from becoming fatal. Using every technique they had learned for managing dangerous situations, they finally managed to drive the tiger back, forcing the massive predator to release its grip on the bloodied tourist. But the damage had already been done, both to the victim and to the carefully maintained illusion that tigers could be safely commodified for tourist entertainment. The tourist was rushed to medical facilities with injuries that, while not life-threatening, served as permanent reminders of his encounter with an apex predator. Claw marks across his torso, puncture wounds from the tiger's teeth, and psychological trauma that would last far longer than his physical wounds. These were the souvenirs he would carry home from his Thai vacation. But perhaps more significant than his individual injuries was the broader impact of the viral video that documented his attack. Within hours of being posted on social media, the footage had been viewed millions of times, sparking intense debate about the ethics and safety of wildlife tourism attractions that promised close encounters with apex predators. The video revealed uncomfortable truths about facilities like Tiger Kingdom that many tourists preferred to ignore. The tigers that appeared so docile in promotional materials were not gentle giants that had somehow transcended their predatory nature. They were dangerous wild animals whose behavior was controlled through methods that ranged from questionable to abusive. Wildlife experts who analyzed the footage pointed to several factors that had likely triggered the tiger's attack. The tourist's decision to kneel down to the predator's eye level had been interpreted as a challenge or threat. His direct eye contact violated a fundamental rule of predator interaction that even domestic cat owners understood. Most critically, his attempt to touch the tiger's belly, one of the most sensitive and vulnerable areas on any feline, had crossed a line that no amount of training could condition the animal to accept. Eye contact, kneeling down to tiger level, like challenging him, and I feel trigger point is when this guy touched tiger's belly, which is the most sensitive part of them, and same like cat, they won't allow stranger to touch it, one wildlife expert explained in analyzing the attack. Another observer noted the specific area where the tourist had been touching the tiger. Cats generally do not like being petted on the lower body, especially near butts. This man was petting the tiger continuously near the above-mentioned body area, which must have frustrated the tiger. Final straw was when the man cupped it for a photo. These explanations revealed the fundamental problem with wildlife tourism attractions that promise safe interactions with apex predators. No amount of training could completely override millions of years of evolutionary programming that had made tigers perfect killing machines. The behavioral conditioning that made these encounters possible was always fragile, always temporary, and always subject to failure when the wrong triggers were activated. The attack at Tiger Kingdom was not an isolated incident, but part of a disturbing pattern of wildlife tourism disasters that had been occurring with increasing frequency as more facilities around the world offered close encounters with dangerous animals. From elephant attacks at riding camps to shark encounters gone wrong, the tourism industry's commodification of wildlife was creating a steady stream of victims who discovered too late that apex predators could not be safely reduced to photo props. The psychological factors that drove tourists to seek these dangerous encounters revealed deeper issues about modern society's relationship with nature and risk. Social media had created a culture where the value of experiences was measured by their shareability rather than their safety. The more extreme and dangerous an encounter appeared, the more likely it was to generate likes, shares, and social media fame. This dynamic had created a market for increasingly risky wildlife interactions as tourism operators competed to offer the most dramatic experiences possible. Facilities that once kept visitors at safe distances from dangerous animals found themselves under pressure to allow closer and closer contact to satisfy tourists who had been conditioned by social media to expect intimate encounters with apex predators. The business model of places like Tiger Kingdom depended on maintaining the illusion that tigers were manageable, predictable animals that could be safely handled by tourists with minimal training. This illusion was essential to their commercial success, but it was also fundamentally dishonest about the nature of the animals being exploited for entertainment. Tigers in the wild were solitary, territorial predators that viewed any intrusion into their space as either a threat to be eliminated or prey to be consumed. The idea that such animals could be transformed into docile photo companions through training or conditioning was a dangerous fantasy that put both tourists and animals at risk. The methods used to create docile behavior in captive tigers were often hidden from tourists who preferred not to think about how their photo opportunities were made possible. These methods could include sedation with drugs that kept the animals sluggish and unresponsive, physical punishment that conditioned them to suppress their natural behaviors, or psychological conditioning that broke their spirits through prolonged captivity and abuse. None of these methods could guarantee safety because they all worked against the fundamental nature of apex predators that had evolved to be suspicious, territorial, and violent when threatened. The conditioning might hold for months or years, but it could fail in an instant when the right combination of triggers activated the predator's natural responses. The tourist who was attacked at Tiger Kingdom had unknowingly provided exactly those triggers. His body language, his direct eye contact, his invasion of the tiger's personal space, and his touching of sensitive areas had combined to overwhelm whatever conditioning the animal had received. In that moment, the tiger had reverted to its true nature as an apex predator, responding to perceived threats with the violence that had kept its species alive for millions of years. The viral nature of the attack video had exposed these uncomfortable realities to a global audience that had previously been content to view wildlife tourism through the sanitized lens of promotional materials. The footage showed the raw terror of a tiger attack in real time, stripping away the carefully constructed illusions that made such facilities profitable. Social media users around the world reacted with a mixture of horror, fascination, and criticism as they watched the attack unfold. Many expressed concern for the victims' well-being, while others questioned the wisdom of facilities that allowed such close contact with apex predators. The debate that followed revealed deep divisions about the ethics of wildlife tourism and the responsibilities of both operators and visitors in preventing such incidents. Some defenders of wildlife tourism argued that facilities like Tiger Kingdom served important conservation purposes by educating the public about endangered species and generating revenue that could be used for protection efforts. They claimed that close encounters with tigers helped people develop emotional connections to these animals that would translate into support for conservation programs. Critics countered that facilities focused on tourist entertainment rather than genuine conservation, arguing that the welfare of individual animals was sacrificed for commercial profit. They pointed out that tigers, in legitimate conservation programs, were not subjected to the stress and manipulation required to make them safe for tourist interactions. The attack also highlighted the broader ethical questions surrounding the captivity of apex predators for human entertainment. Tigers were not domestic animals that had evolved to live alongside humans. They were wild predators whose psychological and physical needs could not be met in captivity, regardless of how well designed their enclosures might be. The stress of captivity, combined with the constant exposure to humans and the conditioning required to suppress their natural behaviors, created psychological trauma in these animals that could manifest in unpredictable ways. The attack at Tiger Kingdom might have been triggered by the tourists' specific actions, but it occurred within the context of an animal that had been subjected to years of unnatural conditions that violated every aspect of its evolutionary programming. Wildlife experts who studied captive tiger behavior noted that these animals often displayed signs of psychological distress, including repetitive behaviors, aggression toward handlers, and sudden explosive reactions to minor stimuli. The apparent docility that tourists interpreted as friendliness was often actually a form of learned helplessness, a psychological state where animals had given up trying to escape or assert their natural behaviors. This psychological damage made captive tigers even more unpredictable than their wild counterparts, because their normal behavioral patterns had been disrupted by years of unnatural conditioning. A wild tiger might be dangerous, but its behavior followed predictable patterns that experienced handlers could understand and anticipate. A psychologically damaged captive tiger was a loaded weapon that could discharge without warning. The commercial success of facilities like Tiger Kingdom depended on tourists remaining ignorant of these realities. Visitors paid premium prices for the fantasy of safely interacting with apex predators, and they were willing to ignore evidence that contradicted this fantasy as long as the illusion could be maintained. The attack that was captured on video shattered this illusion for millions of viewers worldwide, exposing the dangerous reality behind the carefully marketed experience. The footage showed that no amount of human control could guarantee safety when dealing with animals that had been designed by evolution to kill efficiently and without mercy. The broader implications of the incident extended far beyond the individual victim, or even the specific facility where it occurred. The viral video became a symbol of the broader problems with wildlife tourism that prioritized entertainment value over animal welfare and visitor safety. Around the world, similar facilities offered comparable experiences with other dangerous animals. Lion walks in Africa, elephant rides in Asia, swimming with dolphins in captivity, and countless other activities that promised intimate contact with wild animals. The attack at Tiger Kingdom served as a warning about the risks inherent in all such encounters. The tourism industry's response to the incident was predictably defensive, with operators arguing that proper safety protocols could prevent similar attacks and that the benefits of wildlife tourism outweighed the risks. But critics pointed out that the fundamental problem was not inadequate safety measures, but the inherent impossibility of safely commodifying apex predators for tourist entertainment. The psychological impact on other tourists who witnessed the attack was severe and long-lasting. Many reported having nightmares about the incident, developing phobias about large animals, and questioning their own decisions to participate in wildlife tourism activities. The trauma of watching a tiger attack unfold in real time had stripped away their romantic notions about human-animal interactions and forced them to confront the reality that nature was neither safe nor predictable. For the staff at Tiger Kingdom, the attack represented a professional and personal failure that called into question everything they thought they knew about managing captive tigers. The trainers who had worked with the attacking animal for years suddenly found themselves questioning whether they had ever truly understood or controlled the predator they had been handling daily. The incident also raised serious questions about the training and qualifications of staff at wildlife tourism facilities. Many such operations employed local workers who had little formal education in animal behavior or safety protocols. They learned their jobs through on-the-job training that emphasized crowd control and photo opportunities rather than genuine understanding of predator psychology. This lack of expertise created dangerous situations where staff members were responsible for managing apex predators without truly understanding the animals they were working with. The trainers at Tiger Kingdom had clearly been caught off guard by the attack, responding with panic rather than the calm professionalism that might have minimized the damage. The regulatory environment surrounding wildlife tourism was another factor that contributed to incidents like the one at Tiger Kingdom. Many countries had minimal oversight of facilities that offered animal encounters, relying on industry self-regulation rather than government enforcement of safety standards. Thailand's wildlife tourism industry operated in a regulatory grey area where facilities could obtain licenses to keep captive animals without demonstrating adequate expertise in animal behavior or safety management. The result was a proliferation of operations that prioritized profit over safety, creating conditions where attacks like the one captured on video were inevitable. International pressure following high-profile incidents had led to some improvements in regulatory oversight, but enforcement remained inconsistent and often ineffective. Facilities that violated safety protocols faced minimal penalties, while the potential profits from wildlife tourism continued to incentivize risky practices. The role of social media in promoting dangerous wildlife encounters could not be ignored in analyzing incidents like the Tiger Kingdom attack. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook had created a culture where the value of experiences was measured by their shareability rather than their safety or authenticity. Tourists were increasingly seeking out extreme experiences that would generate social media engagement, viewing dangerous animal encounters as opportunities to demonstrate their courage and adventurous spirit to online audiences. This dynamic created demand for ever more risky activities as tourism operators competed to offer the most dramatic experiences possible. The viral nature of the Tiger Kingdom attack video demonstrated both the power and the danger of social media in shaping tourism trends. While the footage served an educational purpose by exposing the risks of wildlife tourism, it also generated millions of views and extensive media coverage that inadvertently promoted the very facility where the attack had occurred. This paradox highlighted the complex relationship between social media exposure and tourism marketing. Even negative publicity could translate into increased visitor numbers as people sought out the same experiences they'd seen in viral videos, regardless of the dangers those videos had revealed. The psychological factors that drove tourists to seek dangerous wildlife encounters revealed deeper issues about modern society's relationship with nature and risk. Many visitors to facilities like Tiger Kingdom were urban dwellers who had little experience with wild animals and romanticized notions about human-animal relationships based on movies, television, and social media rather than biological reality. These tourists often approached apex predators with the same casual attitude they might bring to petting a domestic animal, completely unaware that they were dealing with creatures that had evolved to kill anything they perceived as a threat. Their lack of understanding about predator behavior made them particularly vulnerable to attacks when their actions triggered aggressive responses. The commercialization of wildlife encounters had also created a false sense of security among tourists who assumed that if an activity was being offered commercially, it must be safe. They failed to recognize that tourism operators had financial incentives to downplay risks and that regulatory oversight was often inadequate to ensure genuine safety. This misplaced trust led tourists to take risks they would never consider in other contexts, approaching apex predators with a confidence that was based on marketing rather than reality. The attack at Tiger Kingdom demonstrated the deadly consequences of this disconnect between perception and reality. The international wildlife conservation community's response to incidents like the Tiger Kingdom attack was mixed, reflecting deep divisions about the role of tourism in conservation efforts. Some conservationists argued that facilities offering animal encounters served important educational purposes and generated revenue that could be used for protection programs. Others contended that such facilities actually harmed conservation efforts by promoting the commodification of wildlife and creating demand for captive animals that were often obtained through illegal means. They argued that genuine conservation required protecting animals in their natural habitats, rather than exploiting them for tourist entertainment. The debate over wildlife tourism's conservation value was complicated by the economic realities facing many developing countries where such facilities operated. Tourism revenue was often a crucial source of income for local communities, and wildlife attractions could provide alternatives to more destructive economic activities like logging or poaching. However, critics pointed out that the economic benefits of wildlife tourism were often overstated and that most profits went to international operators rather than local communities. They argued that sustainable conservation required long-term protection of ecosystems rather than short-term exploitation of individual animals for tourist entertainment. The attack at Tiger Kingdom also highlighted the medical and legal complexities that arose when tourists were injured during wildlife encounters. The victim faced not only physical injuries, but also potential complications related to insurance coverage, medical treatment in a foreign country, and legal liability for his own actions that had contributed to the attack. Many travel insurance policies contained exclusions for injuries sustained during high-risk activities, leaving tourists financially responsible for expensive medical treatment and evacuation costs. The legal frameworks governing wildlife tourism were often unclear about liability when tourists voluntarily participated in dangerous activities despite being warned of the risks. These practical considerations added another layer of complexity to the already difficult decisions that tourists faced when considering whether to participate in wildlife encounters. The potential consequences of an attack extended far beyond immediate physical injuries to include long-term financial and legal complications. The psychological trauma experienced by attack victims was another factor that was often overlooked in discussions of wildlife tourism safety. Even tourists who survived attacks with minimal physical injuries often suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, phobias, and other psychological conditions that could persist for years after the incident. The sudden transformation from vacation adventure to life-threatening emergency created lasting trauma that could affect victims' ability to travel, their relationships with family members who had witnessed the attack, and their overall quality of life. These psychological costs were rarely considered in risk-benefit analyses of wildlife tourism activities. The impact on family members and fellow tourists who witnessed attacks was also significant, but often ignored. The viral video of the Tiger Kingdom attack had traumatized viewers around the world who experienced vicarious trauma from watching the violence unfold, even though they had not been physically present during the incident. This secondary trauma highlighted the broader social costs of wildlife tourism incidents that extended far beyond the immediate victims to affect entire communities of people who were exposed to the violence through media coverage or personal witness. The training and support provided to tourism staff who dealt with dangerous animals was another area where the industry often fell short of adequate standards. Workers at facilities like Tiger Kingdom were expected to manage apex predators on a daily basis, but often received minimal training in animal behavior, emergency response, or trauma management. When attacks occurred, these staff members were often as traumatized as the tourists they were supposed to protect. The psychological impact of witnessing or being involved in animal attacks could lead to long-term mental health problems among workers who lacked access to adequate counseling or support services. The high turnover rates at many wildlife tourism facilities reflected the stress and trauma associated with working closely with dangerous animals. Experienced staff members often left the industry after witnessing attacks, taking their knowledge and expertise with them and leaving facilities dependent on inexperienced workers who were more likely to make mistakes that could lead to future incidents. The international media coverage of the Tiger Kingdom attack sparked renewed debate about the regulation of wildlife tourism and the responsibilities of governments to protect both tourists and animals from exploitation. Some countries began implementing stricter licensing requirements for facilities that offered animal encounters, while others continued to prioritize tourism revenue over safety concerns. The patchwork of international regulations created a confusing landscape where tourists could participate in activities that were banned in some countries but legal in others. This regulatory inconsistency made it difficult for tourists to make informed decisions about the safety and ethics of wildlife encounters they were considering. International conservation organizations called for global standards governing wildlife tourism that would ensure consistent protection for both animals and tourists, regardless of location. However, the economic interests of tourism-dependent countries often conflicted with conservation goals, creating political obstacles to meaningful reform. The role of tour operators and travel agencies in promoting dangerous wildlife encounters was another factor that contributed to incidents like the Tiger Kingdom attack. Many companies marketed animal encounters without adequately informing customers about the risks involved or the ethical concerns surrounding such activities. Travel agents often lacked detailed knowledge about the facilities they were promoting and relied on marketing materials provided by operators rather than conducting independent assessments of safety and animal welfare standards. This created a system where tourists received biased information that emphasized the excitement of wildlife encounters while downplaying the dangers. The competitive nature of the tourism industry created pressure for operators to offer increasingly dramatic experiences without corresponding investments in safety infrastructure or staff training. Facilities that implemented adequate safety measures often found themselves at a competitive disadvantage compared to operators who cut corners to offer lower prices or more intimate animal encounters. This race to the bottom in safety standards was driven by tourist demand for ever more extreme experiences and the industry's focus on short-term profits rather than long-term sustainability. The result was a proliferation of facilities that prioritized marketing appeal over genuine safety or animal welfare. The educational value of wildlife tourism was often cited as justification for allowing close encounters with dangerous animals, but critics argued that facilities like Tiger Kingdom actually miseducated tourists about animal behavior and conservation needs. By presenting tigers as docile photo props, these facilities reinforced misconceptions about apex predators that could lead to dangerous behavior in other contexts. Tourists who had positive experiences with captive tigers might be more likely to approach wild tigers or other dangerous animals with inappropriate confidence, believing that their previous encounters had taught them how to interact safely with apex predators. This false confidence could prove deadly in situations where professional handlers and safety equipment were not available. The disconnect between captive animal behavior and natural behavior was so significant that encounters with captive tigers provided little genuine education about wild tiger behavior or conservation needs. Tourists learned more about human dominance over animals than about the ecological roles and behavioral patterns that made tigers important components of natural ecosystems. Legitimate conservation education required presenting animals in contexts that accurately reflected their natural behaviors and ecological relationships, rather than as entertainment props that existed primarily for human amusement. The attack at Tiger Kingdom demonstrated the dangers of confusing entertainment with education in wildlife tourism contexts. The economic model underlying facilities like Tiger Kingdom created perverse incentives that prioritized short-term profits over long-term animal welfare and safety. The high costs of properly caring for apex predators meant that facilities faced constant pressure to maximize revenue through increased tourist throughput and more intimate animal encounters. This economic pressure led to overcrowding in enclosures, inadequate rest periods for animals, and shortcuts in safety protocols that increased the risk of attacks. Facilities that invested in proper animal care and safety measures often found themselves unable to compete with operators who prioritized profit margins over responsible practices. The international nature of wildlife tourism meant that facilities could often relocate to countries with more permissive regulations when faced with restrictions in their original locations. This regulatory arbitrage created a global market for dangerous wildlife encounters that was difficult for any single country to control effectively. The demand for wildlife tourism experiences was driven partly by the increasing urbanization of global populations and the resulting disconnection from nature that many people experienced in their daily lives. For urban dwellers who had little contact with wild animals, facilities like Tiger Kingdom offered seemingly rare opportunities to connect with nature in dramatic and memorable ways. However, this urbanization also meant that many tourists lacked the basic knowledge about animal behavior that would have warned them away from dangerous encounters. Their romantic notions about human-animal relationships were shaped more by entertainment media than by biological reality, making them particularly vulnerable to the marketing messages of wildlife tourism operators. The cultural factors that influenced attitudes toward wildlife tourism varied significantly between countries and regions, creating additional complexities in developing effective regulations and safety standards. Some cultures had traditional relationships with dangerous animals that emphasized respect and distance, while others promoted ideas about human dominance over nature that encouraged risky behavior. These cultural differences made it difficult to develop universal safety standards that would be accepted and implemented consistently across different tourism destinations. What seemed like obvious safety precautions in one cultural context might be viewed as unnecessary restrictions in another. The attack at Tiger Kingdom became a case study in the complex interactions between tourism marketing, animal behavior, cultural attitudes, and regulatory frameworks that shaped the global wildlife tourism industry. The incident highlighted the need for more comprehensive approaches to managing the risks and benefits of human-animal encounters in commercial tourism contexts. The long-term consequences of the attack extended beyond the immediate victim to affect the broader wildlife tourism industry and conservation efforts worldwide. The viral video sparked international discussions about the ethics and safety of animal encounters that influenced policy decisions and tourist behavior in countries far from Thailand. Some tourism operators responded to the incident by implementing stricter safety protocols and reducing the intimacy of animal encounters they offered. Others doubled down on marketing messages that emphasized the safety and educational value of their programs while minimizing discussion of risks. The mixed industry response reflected the fundamental tensions between commercial interests and safety concerns that characterized the wildlife tourism sector. Without consistent regulatory frameworks and enforcement mechanisms, individual operators remained free to make their own decisions about acceptable risk levels and safety standards. The incident also highlighted the importance of tourist education and personal responsibility in preventing wildlife attacks. While operators bore primary responsibility for ensuring safety, tourists also needed to understand the risks they were accepting and the behaviors that could trigger aggressive responses from dangerous animals. The challenge was developing educational approaches that could effectively communicate complex information about animal behavior and risk assessment to diverse tourist populations with varying levels of education and cultural backgrounds. The failure of existing educational efforts was evident in the continued occurrence of preventable attacks like the one at Tiger Kingdom. The role of technology in both creating and preventing wildlife tourism incidents was another factor that deserved consideration. Social media platforms had created demand for increasingly dramatic animal encounters by rewarding extreme content with viral distribution and advertising revenue. However, technology could also be used to improve safety through better monitoring systems, communication devices, and educational tools that could help tourists make more informed decisions about wildlife encounters. The challenge was developing technological solutions that prioritize safety over entertainment value. The attack at Tiger Kingdom represented more than just an isolated incident of tourist misfortune. It was a symptom of broader systemic problems in how modern society approached relationships with dangerous wildlife. The commercialization of apex predators for entertainment purposes reflected deeper cultural attitudes about human dominance over nature that were ultimately unsustainable and dangerous. The viral video of the attack served as a stark reminder that millions of years of evolution could not be overcome by human training techniques or marketing messages. Tigers remained apex predators regardless of their captive status, and treating them as photo props was a form of collective delusion that periodically resulted in violent reality checks. The tourist who was attacked had paid a personal price for this collective delusion, suffering injuries that would serve as permanent reminders of his encounter with evolutionary reality. But his experience also provided a valuable lesson for others who might be tempted to seek similar encounters with apex predators in pursuit of social media fame or vacation thrills. The broader implications of his attack extended far beyond individual tourist safety to encompass fundamental questions about humanity's relationship with the natural world and the ethics of commodifying wild animals for entertainment purposes. These questions would continue to generate debate and controversy as long as facilities like Tiger Kingdom continued to operate and tourists continued to seek increasingly extreme encounters with dangerous wildlife. The incident at Tiger Kingdom served as a microcosm of larger environmental and ethical challenges facing modern society. The same attitudes that led tourists to treat tigers as photo props also contributed to habitat destruction, species extinction, and climate change, all consequences of viewing nature as existing primarily for human benefit rather than having intrinsic value deserving of respect. The attack video that went viral around the world became an unintended educational tool that forced millions of viewers to confront the reality that apex predators could not be safely domesticated or commodified for human entertainment. The footage stripped away the carefully constructed illusions that made wildlife tourism profitable and revealed the violent truth that lay beneath the marketing messages. For the tourism industry, the incident represented both a crisis and an opportunity. The negative publicity generated by the attack could lead to decreased demand for wildlife encounters and increased regulatory scrutiny that might threaten the profitability of such operations. However, the incident also provided an opportunity for responsible operators to differentiate themselves by implementing genuine safety measures and ethical practices that prioritized animal welfare and tourist safety over short-term profits. The challenge was whether the industry would learn from this incident or continue business as usual until the next attack generated another round of negative publicity. The psychological and cultural factors that drove tourists to seek dangerous wildlife encounters would likely persist regardless of individual incidents like the Tiger Kingdom attack. The human desire for adventure, social media validation, and connection with nature created ongoing demand for extreme experiences that could not be easily satisfied through safer alternatives. This persistent demand meant that wildlife tourism operators would continue to face pressure to offer increasingly intimate animal encounters, despite the obvious risks involved. Without fundamental changes in tourist attitudes and expectations, incidents like the Tiger Kingdom attack would continue to occur with predictable regularity. The international conservation community remained divided about how to respond to wildlife tourism incidents and whether such facilities could ever be reformed to meet acceptable standards of animal welfare and tourist safety. Some advocates called for complete bans on commercial wildlife encounters, while others argued for improved regulation and oversight that could make such activities safer and more ethical. The debate reflected broader disagreements about the role of tourism in conservation efforts and whether the economic benefits of wildlife tourism could justify the risks to both animals and humans. These disagreements were unlikely to be resolved easily, given the complex economic, cultural, and political factors involved. The attack at Tiger Kingdom would be remembered as one of many incidents that highlighted the fundamental incompatibility between commercial tourism and apex predator management. The viral video served as a permanent record of what happened when human arrogance encountered evolutionary reality, providing a stark warning that would be ignored by future tourists at their own peril. The tourist screams captured on that video echoed the cries of countless other victims who had learned too late that no amount of human control could truly tame creatures that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of killing. The tiger that attacked him was simply doing what tigers had always done when their boundaries were crossed, responding with the violence that had made their species apex predators long before humans existed. The incident served as a reminder that nature operated according to rules that could not be negotiated or modified for human convenience. The tiger's attack was not malicious or unprovoked. It was the predictable response of an apex predator whose instincts had been triggered by behaviors that violated every principle of safe animal interaction. The tourist who knelt beside that tiger, seeking the perfect selfie, had unknowingly entered into a contract written in millions of years of evolutionary programming. The terms of that contract were simple: respect the predator's boundaries, or face the consequences of crossing lines that had been drawn in blood and bone long before the first human ever walked the earth. His attack became part of a growing catalogue of incidents that documented the price of forgetting humanity's place in the natural order. Each viral video, each news report, each social media post about wildlife tourism attacks added to a body of evidence that apex predators could not be safely commodified for human entertainment. Yet the lessons of these incidents were consistently ignored by new generations of tourists who believed that modern technology and human cleverness could overcome millions of years of predator evolution. The cycle of attack, outrage, and eventual forgetting continued with depressing regularity as the tourism industry found new ways to market dangerous encounters with apex predators. The tiger that attacked the tourist at Tiger Kingdom was eventually returned to its enclosure, where it would continue to be used for tourist encounters, despite having demonstrated its capacity for violence. The facility's operators likely implemented minor safety modifications while continuing to market the same basic experience that had led to the attack. This pattern of minimal response to serious incidents reflected the economic pressures that drove wildlife tourism operations and the lack of effective regulatory oversight that might have forced more substantial changes. As long as tourists continued to pay for dangerous animal encounters, operators would continue to provide them regardless of the risks involved. The viral video of the attack would eventually fade from public attention as new incidents and controversies captured social media's notoriously short attention span. But the lessons embedded in that footage about human arrogance, predator, nature, and the deadly consequences of treating apex predators as entertainment props would remain relevant as long as people continued to seek increasingly extreme encounters with dangerous wildlife. The tourist who was mauled by that tiger had become an unwitting educator, his pain and terror serving as a warning to others who might be tempted to cross similar lines in pursuit of social media fame or vacation thrills. His attack was a reminder that some boundaries should never be crossed, some risks should never be taken, and some creatures should never be treated as anything other than the apex predators they had always been. The golden afternoon in Phuket that had begun with vacation excitement had ended with screams, blood, and the harsh reminder that nature's rules could not be suspended for human convenience. The tourist's quest for the perfect selfie had resulted in an encounter with evolutionary reality that would leave permanent scars, both physical and psychological. But perhaps most tragically, his suffering would likely be forgotten by future tourists who would make the same mistakes, cross the same boundaries, and learn the same lessons in the same violent way. The cycle would continue because human nature seemed as unchangeable as tiger nature. both species following ancient programming that occasionally brought them into deadly conflict. These harrowing encounters with captive apex predators reveal a chilling truth about our modern relationship with nature's most dangerous creatures. From the manicured enclosures of Thai tiger parks to similar facilities worldwide, tourists continue to seek increasingly intimate encounters with predators that have never learned to distinguish between entertainment and survival. The viral footage from Tiger Kingdom represents just one documented case among countless others, where vacation adventures transform into life-threatening encounters with creatures that remain fundamentally wild despite years of captivity. But this incident is part of a much larger and more disturbing pattern of wildlife tourism disasters occurring across the globe. If you found this encounter as shocking as we did, hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying tales of when human arrogance collides with apex predator instincts. Every week, we explore the most gripping stories of tourists who discovered too late that no amount of training or conditioning can override millions of years of evolutionary programming designed for killing. Because in a world where people treat tigers like photo props, understanding these predators' true nature could be the difference between a memorable vacation and becoming their next victim. The tourist who knelt beside that tiger, seeking his perfect selfie, had unknowingly signed a contract written in blood and bone, agreeing to terms that had been negotiated over millions of years of predator evolution. Terms that demanded respect, distance, and the recognition that some creatures would never be anything other than the apex predators they were born to be.